President, I rise today to discuss the confirmation of 4 pending U.S. Attorney nominations. Currently in the United States, we have 85 U.S. attorneys. There's several in my state, and depending on your population, it really indicates how many numbers you have. Those U.S. attorney nominations are filled by the incumbent President of the United States. Recommendations are made to the United States Senate, and we advise and consent on those nominations. And after an examination of their background, we vote these individuals to become U.S. attorneys. Now, we have an agreement that has endured for a number of presidents and a number of years, which says that these will be fairly routine, in fact, very routine. The fact is that each one of the U.S. attorney nominations goes through a review by the Senate Judiciary Committee, both Democrats and Republicans, and if they pass that review without controversy, they move to the floor for a vote. To give you an idea how that works, so the members on the other side who are relatively new to the Senate, when President Donald Trump made nominations of U.S. attorneys, he made 85 nominations. Each one of those nominations came to the floor of the United States Senate, and they were approved by voice vote, unanimous consent. In other words, not even a roll call was required. It was a routine approval of a U.S. attorney's nomination in a situation where a body like the Senate would have a majority of Democrats but approve a nomination from a Republican president by voice vote. No controversy. Moving forward. Why is it important to even fill these vacancies? Because these 85 U.S. attorneys are literally the people who implement the policies of the Department of Justice. If the Department of Justice of the United States decides that we're going to have a serious effort under a president to go after fentanyl, for example, or narcotics, for example, or some crime wave in another area, it's the U.S. attorney who runs the play. He's the quarterback in that U.S. attorney district. So these turn out to be fairly critical. Some of us stayed up late last night to watch a debate. And in that debate, there was discussion of crime in the United States and what we're going to do to stop it. Well, all the candidates, regardless of party, would be in favor of reducing crime. I'm assuming that every one of my colleagues who's on the floor now and wishes to speak would put themselves in the same category. We want to stop crime in our states and in our country, and we rely on the Department of Justice to do that. The one who leads the effort in each and every state is the U.S. attorney. And in this circumstance, we have 4 nominees for U.S. attorney who have been waiting patiently for the approval of the United States Senate. On seven previous occasions, I have requested unanimous consent, the same process that was followed with every single one of Donald Trump's U.S. attorneys. I've requested unanimous consent for the Senate to take up and confirm law enforcement nominees nominated by President Joseph Biden. Each and every time, the junior senator from Ohio, now running for Vice President of the United States, has objected. I asked him in many occasions when we came to the floor and raised this question, what objection do you have to this U.S. attorney nominee? He said over the time, I don't have any objection to this nominee. I object to the Department of Justice, and I want to stop U.S. attorneys from being appointed nationwide. Communities across America desperately need their top federal prosecutors in place. U.S. attorneys lead the nation's effort to prosecute violent criminals and protect our communities from violent crime, child exploitation, terrorism, and much more. The U.S. Attorney's Office and 4 districts I'm talking about today are no exception. I just left a meeting this morning. We gathered about 40 or 50 leaders from across the United States to talk about child trafficking. Child trafficking, of course, is a federal crime prosecuted by the Department of Justice in each and every one of our states where it happens. I can't think of a more awful situation for a person to live through as those this morning who talked about what they lived through before the prosecution took place and the person was removed from the state. I would not want to play political games with those nominations. Those U.S. attorneys do critical work in each and every state. We felt that way under President Trump, and that's why we allowed his U.S. Attorney nominees to move forward by voice vote, and I think President Biden is entitled to the same treatment. The entire nation has been impacted by the opioid epidemic. Ohio is one of the states that's been hit the hardest. In 2023, nearly 4,500 Ohio residents died from an accidental drug overdose. That story can be told over and over in state after state. The U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Ohio could focus her attention on combating this drug crisis with the DEA's Operation Overdrive. This operation, set up in a location in Toledo, is due to the city's, quote, copious violent crimes, including homicides, shootings, assaults, and drug overdoses. We are talking about serious prosecutions and a team of effective professionals to fight them, not just in Ohio and Illinois, but around the nation. Instead, this nomination, one of them today, which I'm suggesting, the nomination of Rebecca Lutzko, has languished for more than a year because of the objection of the junior senator from Ohio. It may have helped that senator to make that decision for some other reason, but it certainly doesn't help fighting crime in his home state to have a vacancy in this office. He's harming Americans and undermining public safety across the country for reasons I can't explain. The Senate has a long history of confirming U.S. Attorney nominees, as I said. We've done it by unanimous consent. We've made it fairly routine, as it should be. All 85 of President Donald Trump's nominees for U.S. Attorney were filled by unanimous consent. The Senate has a long history of following that practice. Before President Biden took office, the last time the Senate required a roll call on a U.S. Attorney was 1975. 49 years ago. You have to go back 49 years to find an objection to U.S. Attorney nominee. At the beginning of a new presidential administration, it's customary for the U.S. Attorney to step down and for the new president to select replacements. That's why during the Trump administration, we moved so many so quickly. Senate Democrats allowed every single one of President Trump's nominees to be confirmed by unanimous consent, many of whom we would not personally have selected, but it's just a courtesy to a new president to fill the vacancies. It wouldn't have been fair or realistic to force the Senate to debate and vote on every single one of these nominees. Each one of these votes is a process which eats up several days of the calendar. We already do that for nominations for the federal bench. It would not have been fair or realistic to expect it for U.S. attorneys. So we respected the then president, we respected our colleagues, and we respected the need for the Senate to have confirmed leadership in the U.S. Attorney's Office. We put public safety and the needs of law enforcement ahead of politics. We've done it always when it came to U.S. attorneys until now. The senator from Indiana and some of his colleagues have set an unfortunate standard. They are putting us on a path to require cloture and confirmation votes on every U.S. attorney nominee. We talk about a waste of time. That would be a terrible waste of time. This is entirely unsustainable, which is something everyone here knows. Without Senate-confirmed leadership of U.S. attorneys, public safety will suffer across the United States. Candidates cannot vote to delay these nominations and then stand up that they're for law and order and they want to fight crime. We shouldn't be playing politics. I don't know the reason behind this. I believe it's entirely political, but I hope my colleagues will think twice about it. What we do to one another will likely be revisited and become a precedent in the Senate to the detriment of everyone. These highly qualified nominees that I'm nominating today, the four of them, have the strong support of their home state senators, including several members of the Republican caucus. And if President Biden has been accused of misuse of the Justice Department, we shouldn't take that out on these individuals who are competent and qualified to keep us safe. Until we confirm them, law enforcement agencies in Iowa, Massachusetts, and Ohio will be stymied in their ability to fight crime. Don't be given a speech that says I want to have a real assault on crime in my state or my district, and then turn around and stop the prosecutor from being appointed who has that job. Otherwise, there'll be a temporary appointment, and the effort cannot be as effective as it might be. That is a loss to their nation and increases the danger of the people living in that particular state. And so, Madam President, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate consider the following nominations en bloc: calendar number 544, 545, 604, and 605. Those are the nominations of Matthew Gannon to serve as U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Iowa, Rebecca Lutzko to serve as U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Ohio, Joshua Levy to serve as U.S. Attorney for the District of Massachusetts, and David Waterman to serve as U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Iowa. That the Senate vote on the nominations en bloc without intervening action or debate. That if confirmed, the motions to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table, and the President be immediately notified of the Senate's action, and the Senate resume legislative session.
Is there objection?
Madam President.
The junior senator from Tennessee.
Reserving the right to object. These are Biden-Harris Department of Justice nominees. What's the Biden-Harris Department of Justice focused on right now? Multiple prosecutions of former President Donald J. Trump. Never before in history has a major American presidential candidate been criminally charged, much less by his campaign opponent's Department of Justice. Yet, in the middle of this presidential election, the Biden-Harris Justice Department has brought two different prosecutions against their presidential election opponent. Other Democrat prosecutors have brought three other sets of charges. These cases have been timed to peak during the election. So right now, President Biden's election opponent is on trial in 5 separate jurisdictions, all by partisan Democrat prosecutors, all on different charges, and all peaking right in the middle of this presidential campaign. This begs a simple question. Is this coordinated election interference, or is this merely a coincidence? It's beyond credulity that these charges would have been brought against anyone but President Trump, especially 5 different prosecutions, all brought during the presidential election. The contortions of fact and law underlying these prosecutions testify to that. So do the political campaign promises and presidential commands behind the prosecutions underscore this? Of course they do. The New York Times reported in April of 2022 that President Biden told advisors that he wanted his Justice Department to prosecute President Trump. Shortly thereafter, his Justice Department dutifully appointed Jack Smith to prosecute President Trump. When Alvin Bragg ran for district attorney, he campaigned on getting Trump. He did just that, using a made-up, never-before-pursued theory. When Letitia James ran for New York Attorney General, she said that her entire campaign was about getting President Trump. Even Democrat Representative Dan Goldman called it, quote, an individualized political vendetta. 5 years later, in the middle of the campaign, she brought a baseless case for a $454 million fine. Unheard of. This is a case of show me the man, and I'll show you the crime. It's also blatant election interference. It's outrageous to many Americans. It violates our basic principles of blind justice and the rule of law. And I'm not going to consent to the expeditious confirmation of any more Biden Department of Justice nominees until the American people get a chance to reject this politicized administration of justice. And I'll say this. If these nominees were truly important to Senate Democrats, they would schedule votes on them. Senate Democrats held me for 30 hours of cloture when I came through this process. They're not doing the same here. Therefore, I object. I'd like to reserve the right to object. And I want to withhold my objection to allow the junior senator from Missouri to be recognized.
Madam President.
The junior senator from Missouri.
Thank you, Madam President. Before I get started on this, I thank my colleague from Tennessee. I also want to note to my friend from Illinois that we're not doing anything else on this floor. We're certainly not moving an appropriations process. We could be doing appropriations bills in September. But Chuck Schumer doesn't want to do any of that. So all we're doing is nominations. If you feel so strongly about these individuals, go through the process. And also, it's curious to mention precedent being raised here in this. I, in my first term here in the Senate, just witnessed for the first time in American history, first time ever, in articles of impeachment came over to this chamber and we didn't have a trial. So forgive me if I don't want to be lectured about precedents. There's a process to get this done. We'll never have an opportunity to have a trial on Mayorkas like we should have had. But I digress. My objection here today is not specific to the qualifications of the individuals who've been nominated. My objection instead is to the fact that we live in a time right now, and as a lawyer, this is deeply saddening, where the Department of Justice and other government agencies are being politicized and weaponized. And this is angering the American people, and it should. American history has no shortage of important moments marked by statesmen making difficult decisions, which balance the outrages of the moment with the long-term stability of our republic. Throughout this last year, many of us have denounced here the weaponization of Joe Biden, the weaponization of the Justice Department by Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. What many in the political establishment don't care to acknowledge is that this is resonating even more with American working folks who believe that there's a two-tiered system of justice in our country, and it's being unlawfully applied. From Hillary Clinton's mishandling of classified information to President Joe Biden doing the same, the American public have watched certain people be immune from consequences for their actions. Biden and Harris are attempting to throw their political opponent, Donald Trump, in jail for the rest of his life. It's wrong. They're trying to interfere with this election, and that's why we stand here on the floor today. So, if you're not part of the exclusive club, or if you dare to fight back against its monopoly on power, you're held to a different standard. Those brave enough to fight this system are not only expected to play by the rules, but also subject to capricious, legal, and inconsistent lawfare. Banana Republic stuff. If this were happening in another country, our State Department would be warning us about it. It's happening right here under our noses. These political attacks undermine the American people's faith in their government, a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. We all are one people, but we must only have one standard of which we are judged in our courts. We must immediately halt our creep towards tyranny. So, until the Justice Department resumes its focus on applying equal justice under the law, instead of engaging in partisan lawfare against President Trump, I'll join my colleagues here today. I withhold my objection, Madam President, to allow the senior senator from Alabama to speak.
Madam President.
The senior senator from Alabama.
Madam President, reserving the right to object, I rise today to join my colleagues in objecting to the fast-tracking of Biden-Harris's U.S. attorney nominations. This is a commitment we publicly made in June because of President Biden and Harris's unprecedented attacks on Donald Trump. It didn't have to be this way. But the Biden-Harris administration chose to target its political opponent in an election year. This is the direct result of the weaponization of a justice system they created. This administration has shown time and time again it's willing to do whatever it takes to maintain power. Whether it's lawfare against President Trump or allowing illegals to vote in elections, this administration is hell-bent on election interference. If we don't return to the principles of our Constitution, we will be no better than Venezuela or communist China. As long as this administration remains weaponized against the will of the American people, my answer is no. This is why I'm objecting to unanimous consent of these U.S. attorney nominees today. It is my intent to attach these nominees, not to attack these nominees individually. Rather, it is my intent to use my right as a senator to restore the faith and rule of law in the United States of America. It won't end well if we continue down this path. I, for one, will never stop fighting against this weaponization of the federal government. I don't care who it is. By continuing to stand up for the rights, I believe Americans' faith in our institutions will be restored. Madam President, I withhold my objection to allow the junior senator from Tennessee to be recognized.
Reserving the right to object, Madam Chair.
Junior senator from Tennessee.
Reserving the right to object, Madam Chair. I want to thank my colleagues from Missouri, from Alabama, my colleague from Ohio who's led this effort. And for the reasons I stated earlier, I object.
Objection is heard.
Madam President,
The Democratic whip.
did you hear that? The Department of Justice is too partisan. The Department of Justice is too partisan. It's interesting to note that two of the prosecutions of Donald Trump are not even starting at the Department of Justice. They come from state prosecutions in the states of Georgia and New York, not Washington. So these nominees for U.S. attorney are being held up because of decisions made by some other prosecutor in another state. Apparently that's the case in this situation. And I just have to say that at least in one of these prosecutions in New York, they have been successful in bringing a case against former president and convicting him of felony counts, 34 if I'm not mistaken. So there is some merit to it that goes beyond any question of intrigue in Washington, D.C. Let me also add that as far as I can tell, this Department of Justice has tried to take a reasonable position to avoid conflicts of interest. In this circumstance, we have a special attorney who is appointed to prosecute the president's own son. The president's own son. This Department of Justice, which is being accused of being partisan in this situation. There's no precedent for that in history. And it's a clear effort by the Biden administration to deal fairly with a painful situation personally. Well, you look at this and you say, well, what point have my colleagues made today? They've made the point that in these 4 places in the United States, Iowa on 2 occasions, Massachusetts, and in Ohio, that the competent professionals for prosecution will not be filled, these competent positions will not be filled with individuals who they admitted on the floor they have no objection to. What is the net result of this? It means that crimes that are being committed or alleged to being committed in these states are not going to be prosecuted as aggressively as they should. Don't give me a speech about wanting law and order and safety in the community and then turn around and say, to make a political point, we're going to stop sending prosecutors to these areas. It's inconsistent. It doesn't follow, and it's unfortunate. I'm sorry for these 4 individuals who are worthy candidates to be U.S. attorneys that this happened today. It's happened before, and it's a sad day if this is going to be a new precedent, that any president coming in a new term is going to face this kind of an obstacle course for the routine appointment of individuals to enforce the law across the United States. We will not be a safer nation because of this political strategy. I yield the floor.